Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the latest PwC, The Power of People Reimagined series. Today we're going to talk about sustainability, society and workforce, which is a topic which, other than skills, is probably something that I and many of my colleagues around the world have conversations with organisations around every day. It's such a hot topic. I'm absolutely delighted today to be joined by two fabulous colleagues. First, we have Parul Munshi. Parul is our Global Workforce and Sustainability Leader, and she's based in Singapore. Parul, good evening, and I really appreciate you joining us in the evening over in Singapore.
Good morning, Pete.
Good morning. And then closer to me in London, we have Barry Murphy. Barry is PwC's European Sustainability Practice Leader. And Barry, it's fabulous to hear you. And I know the audience will love to hear your dulcet tones shortly. Good morning, Barry.
Thanks, Pete, and hello, everybody.
So fantastic. So everybody, thanks for joining. As ever, I think you know the drill by now. If you've got any questions that you want to pose throughout this sort of 15, 20-minute discussion we'll have, please feel free to put those in the chat box. I'll endeavour to monitor that and get to those questions as we go through the conversation. Those we miss, we promise we'll get back to you slower time. Okay, so Barry, if I just, and Parul, if I just set the scene, right? So, as you know, we have the PwC Hopes and Fears survey that we do annually, where we survey 56,000 workers across industry, across geographies, just to work out what's on their mind. The latest one, actually, we're going to be releasing in a month's time. But in preparation for this kind of conversation, if I look back at some of the responses from last year around sustainability and the views of workers, I would suggest alarmingly, only 23% of workers say that they feel their organisation is doing something to help reduce the impact of their jobs on the environment and to create a sustainable future. And so, if I maybe come to you first, Parul, right? Business leaders, boards have got so much on their mind at the moment, all sorts of pressures, mega trends hitting them from all directions. Sustainability, climate change, net zero, decarbonisation, whatever you want to call it, right, is front and centre of so many discussions. You can't pick up a newspaper, you can't turn on a television without hearing that in the first 5 minutes, right? Where do they start? What's the first thing they should be thinking about as they embark on this journey or are progressing down this journey?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Pete. I think it's a tough mandate ahead, right? It's complicated. It's extremely linked to a number of other large things going around the world. So it's not easy. But the first point I'd like to make is this, right? I think for leaders listening in today, I think my concern is that today what we are seeing is significant carbon tunnel vision, right? Which is a single-minded focus on reducing carbon emissions, which is, of course, very important. But I think most solutions ignore the very real interconnectedness of the environment and societal considerations, right? An increasing body of research is showing us that real progress on environmental sustainability actually requires solutions that also incorporate social sustainability. So I do want to make that point that, in fact, with some of our clients that, and Barry, you probably are seeing that as well, right? Even when organizations do consider the social issues alongside environmental ones, the two topics are unfortunately often isolated from one another, right? So my first advice for business leaders who are keen to make a genuine impact is remember that the E and the S elements of sustainability are really two sides of the same coin. You need to get both of these considerations into your assessments of products, your projects, your investments, whatever your sector may be. You need to ensure that you're looking at these together and ensure that your team structures also align to this, right? Because often we're seeing these as two very different teams looking at these in complete isolation, right? Then in terms of what do they need to do, I would really simplify this as three big things, right? Focus on these three. The first one is building organizational capability, right? What are the organizational underpinnings for sustainability transformation, right? Second is how do you create individual agency? And lastly, human sustainability, right? So org capability would include things like the use of labor market data. And, Mike, you just quoted something right now, Pete, and the immense data that we have today when it comes to labor market skills data. I think we're just not using it enough to forecast the future shape and form of our organization. So that's there. Of course, purpose-led leadership is a big thing. And then, of course, embedding sustainability into deep in your organization by way of your culture. The second point was around individual agency, right? Which is, do your people have the right skills? So upskill them. And then two, hold them to account. Use it in your KPIs, ensure that your incentives are aligned. And lastly is human sustainability. Are you doing it in a way which is going to be inclusive, that takes care of health and well-being of your employees? So I would say these three things most critical for business leaders who are really looking to make an impact. I don't know, Barry, what your thoughts are. I would love to hear.
I think, Parul, there's so much in there. We could take 20 points out of what you just said and do a whole day's seminar. But I'll pick up on one or two in particular, because that notion of human sustainability, a week ago, we were in Berlin at the Global Solutions Initiative Summit that we've been doing a lot of work with. For those who don't know about it, it's part of a broader policy thinking that brings together global thoughts on some of those big issues Parul has talked about, but feeds into the T20 and G20 as well. And there's a whole theme there across the world of this recoupling notion. The whole idea that, have we got out of balance and forgotten that an economy is there to serve society, not the other way around? Now, I know we have to decouple, growth and carbon usage, but this recoupling theme was a big one. And you've mentioned that, Parul, but also that notion of agency. The recoupling dashboard that the GSI have started to work on has 4 quadrants. It's about solidarity, agency, gain, and environmental sustainability. You've touched on all of them. And that agency one, I think, is massively important, particularly at the moment, as people can feel concerned. They can feel they've inherited disadvantage, not advantage. And from what you and Pete said, people are saying, we want to have a stake in how things work out. So what's my agency to make that happen? And what are the factors that sustain that? So I think those are big themes. From what I've seen, they're on the top of mind for all policymakers, let alone business leaders. So boy, to me, that means maybe we're going to make some significant progress very shortly.
Hey, and if just listening to you both talk then, and the obvious passion and commitment that you both have, I mean, Parul, kind of implicit actually in a lot of what you were saying is actually the whole requirement around skills. Skills, upskilling, finding the right skills. And Barry, if I can just pick up on the point you made, you're at the conference and what have you, and the view of how organizations deal with this, right? In silos, or where does collaboration, connectivity come into this, right? I mean, I would suggest, just as a normal human being, right, it's unlikely that organizations are going to solve for this on their own, right?
Yeah, and I think, Pete, it is tricky because everything is interconnected. It doesn't belong in silos. We can't get into tunnel vision, as Parul said. But if we think about some of the frameworks that are embedding and developing around, how do we think about this broader topic, or the S in ESG, as some people describe it? I suppose what we're seeing is more people going, right, what is our interconnected approach to deal with some of these issues across, you could call it the 4 scopes: workforce, workers in the supply chain, the broader community, and customers, and the inclusivity of our products. And I think on all those 4 dimensions, Pete, look, there's many leaders listening to this today that could tell us a thing or two about some of those areas, and there'll be some great examples. But on things like workforce, there's all of the usual issues that people are tackling around hybrid work, about fair pay, about living wages. And we've got a survey coming out on that on a global basis soon as well. But I think what I'm seeing more is leaders going, okay, this whole green jobs and skills transition that you've mentioned, and just transition as a topic, where are we on that? What does that mean? If you think about supply chain, it's not only focusing on human rights compliance, going way beyond that, and thinking, some of the organizations we're working with are doing deep work with governments on what's creating poverty in places where they have workers, and how do they help alleviate that poverty more broadly. So really advanced thinking. I could go on and more on community. I'll just mention one more, that broader impact on society and how does business work with it. A huge issue in the world today is inequality. It's growing. And we've been doing some work with the Business Commission to tackle inequality. And a flagship report came out last week on what's the role of business in tackling inequality. And again, there's some really good guidance and practical guidance in there about what we can all do in an interconnected way to get on with this and how we can collaborate. Because you're right, none of us can solve it on our own. But that's where I see if we take a more methodical approach across those 4 scopes, pick up on some actually what's in that, Business Commission to Tackle Inequality report about how to get started and get ahead, that's where I see progress really being possible.
And I think that just if I could just build on that a little bit, Barry. So yeah, I think we all know it's accepted that, you know, when you're undergoing some form of significant change transformation, right, it requires people to kind of be on board, be bought in, be on that journey, right, to deliver it. Because, you know, leaders and what have you can say whatever they want, but ultimately it requires, you know, the ingenuity of human beings, right, workers to be bought in. So I'm going to share another sort of interesting data point from the last Hopes and Fears survey, which was around, you know, about, again, 25% of workers say they're aware of their organisation talking about ESG. 75% say they're aware of it, but actually what they see, live, feel as a worker within the organisation is in complete contrast to what they're sort of aware of being spoken about by their leaders. And when we drill down a little bit further, they say often it's stuff that feels a little bit ethereal, a bit hard to understand, hard to relate to. And I think also, and the sort of fairly infamous example, right? So we've all seen on certain, you know, for example, International Women's Day, some organisations will proudly share their, you know, their gender pay gap, right? Only within seconds for somebody through the power of social media and data to pop and say, well, that's really interesting, but the reality is somewhat different. And then lots of scrubbing around in corporate media areas to delete the tweets, right? So talk about that, right, in terms of the engagement of the workforce in this. And Parul, maybe that's one for you naturally, I think.
Yeah, you know, and I think when I was reflecting on what you were saying right now, Pete, I think we have a phenomenal opportunity here, right? And I think there are 2 points that I want to call out. One is that there is a natural sort of pessimism around progress, and there's reason to be, right? We just haven't done as much and quick enough, right? But I do believe that injecting optimism into the overall narrative around what is possible is really important. And I think that's where I come to point number 2, because we have this opportunity. We have Gen X coming in, the first of this sort of generation of workers coming in with tremendous advocacy, tremendous interest in making a change, right? I think we need to be able to channel and harness all that interest and ensure that we are really building on that. And what does that really mean in real terms, right? I think moving away from the platitudes, moving away from the PR machinery, really, how do we use the part of our workforce to co-create, for instance, co-create solutions? We were talking earlier, Barry, about the point around, you know, the decoupling, the recoupling, and, you know, the creation of new value pools, right? If you just look at any study you pick up today and you look at the growth of the market, for instance, even if you look at climate tech solutions, phenomenal growth in that market, right? Where is that going to come from? That is going to come from our workers with the right skills, with the right attitudes around ecosystem-wide collaboration, with the right ability to innovate, right? So how do we ensure that we actually get this going? I do believe there is a huge opportunity for co-creation with our employees, which we just are not doing enough of. And especially the part of the world that I am in, unfortunately, even today, we see a very significant compliance mindset, right? There's a bit of a tick in the box and let's get this done. But I think the sustained outcomes will be realized only when we actually embed this much deeper, ensure our people have the right skills, and then actually channeling that in some of the areas that we just talked about.
And I've just before Barry, before you come back, I've just put on the screen, actually, there's a report putting skills first that the World Economic Forum and PwC released about 3 weeks ago, right, which I think is a really helpful kind of read for people. And Barry, sorry, just to interrupt the flow there.
You've interrupted it now, Pete. But no, I'll just pick up really briefly that you're kind of going to the say-do gap. I always remember someone said to me, Barry, integrity is when you do the right thing even when nobody is looking. And everybody is looking even more now than ever before because, as Parul mentioned at the start, data and the transparency of data has exploded. And let's just take one simple, well, not one simple one, one. EU CSRD, Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. Within that, you've got 4 standards that are focused on exactly what we're talking about, the social dimension. That's going to expose more data and more opportunity for people to go, are you really doing what you're saying you're about in your purpose? So I do feel that on the positive side, there's a wonderful opportunity, and many organizations we're working with are embracing it, to see the advent of reporting regulations like CSRD being time for a real strategic think about how do we embrace the energy of our people? How do we embrace that appetite for new skills? How do we embrace people's desire to do things differently? And I think what we say we're going to do, we're going to be really held to account more than ever before on this. I see that as a massive positive. And I think if you only take a compliance mindset, I'm with you, Parul, you never get there. So I think there's a lot of factors coming together that are going to push us on this say-do gap. But I think that's a very positive development.
So thank you. And I'm just going to come to the questions, but you raised a really interesting point there around sort of reporting, Barry. And it reminds me, several months ago, we did a session at LinkedIn Live with our colleague Nadia Picard over in Germany. Yeah. I think it's timely probably to get Nadia back, right? So there's been so much progress and developments in that space since she spoke. So thank you for that. Now I'm going to turn to some of the questions. We've had a lot coming in, actually. So here's the first one. Okay, an easy one to start with. And Barry, let's start with you. What are some of the practical steps organizations can take to address inequality?
Okay, so I suppose, look, at a very top level, you have to decide, first of all, what are the aspects that are going to impact your business and that your business impacts? What is that therefore you can realistically influence as an organization in your working practices, in your engagement with communities? But even more so, what are some of the impacts that you're seeing that you need to get together with other industry players? And we've seen a lot of that happening, and we've seen competition law starting to change to encourage more of that collaboration. But then it's being very methodical about having decided what you want to address. How are you now going to set up the embedding of that within all of your decision processes in the business? What are the measures you're going to use to hold yourself to account? And you're probably going to have to report some of those externally. And then how do you constantly iterate to see, are we achieving the outcomes? Not are we doing lots of activity? Are we achieving the outcomes that we are trying to focus on? And I could say more, but actually there is a chapter within that Business Commission to Tackle Inequality report I mentioned that is all about, here's a 5-6 step process to get on with, okay, how do I address this inequality issue? So that's another source of great information on this.
Barry, thank you. And I'm going to pivot to another question, just conscious of the time. And Parul, this is absolutely one for you. What are the specific considerations for a just transition in Southeast Asia?
I mean, I think this is it's a very, very critical one. And I'm just privileged to be sort of sat in this part of the world and seeing it very, very closely, right? So, I mean, we'll all agree that it has become even clearer over the past year that the energy transition has to deliver not just net zero emissions, but also energy security, resilience, and affordability. I think this holds true across the world, right? On the one hand, in Southeast Asia in particular, we still have a very fossil fuel-based economy. I mean, think of it, 6 of the top 10 coal-using countries in the world are actually in Asia, right? On the other hand, we also have one of the largest growing middle classes, right, which is further propelling consumption and energy demand, right? I was very encouraged, Barry, you and I talked about it the other day, about loss and damage having secured a formal spot at COP27. I think that was some optimism injected, as I said, into the narrative. The other piece was the just energy transition partnerships, right, in Africa and parts of Southeast Asia, again, a positive step in the direction to channel public and private finance to fund the energy transition. For instance, we've been working with the ASEAN Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which has recently included social considerations, right, for promotion of human rights, prevention of forced labor, for instance, right? I think these are all positive progress that we have made in this direction, I would say. What Southeast Asia needs next is not just financial and infrastructure resources, but also a capable workforce. I know I keep harking back, Pete, to skills, but I do believe that Southeast Asia, given our competitive advantage that was housed in low-cost labor, can actually be now housed in highly skilled labor, just given our demographic dividend, right? I do think that is a very significant consideration when it comes to the just transition in Southeast Asia in particular, to unlock much greater dividend from our unique demographics, which is a very young workforce. So I think I'm positively much more optimistic today than I was a few years ago about Southeast Asia's ability to create far more inclusive opportunities. And I think also beginning to undo some of the very structural inequalities which are very deeply rooted in this society. We're very happy, whoever's asked that question, very happy to continue this dialogue. I think there's so much more for all of us to do.
So can you believe it? So 20 minutes has flown by, right? So, and there's a whole bunch of questions there that we will get to offline. So look, thank you both. And just to tie it together, I think Parul, there's so many places we go, and this has been a fascinating discussion. Your passion, your energy, both of you, is so clear. What are the three things you want people to think about in terms of, what organizations should be thinking about right now?
Three things is always hard, but I think as consultants, we are always thinking in threes. So I think the first one I've said before, which is the power of data. I think we've never been in such a data-rich environment. I think we can do a lot more to use labor market data to predict jobs, to forecast skills, and proactively develop these skills in the workforce. So that's one. Two is very, very importantly, as Barry said, look beyond your own workforce, right? Your supply chain, your communities, and your customers, right? And I would say unabashedly, it's the large organizations that absolutely need to take the lead to drive ecosystem change. So that's two. And lastly, I think that point around advocacy, use employee advocacy as a force for good. Co-create, channel young energy for far more sustained outcomes, because ultimately it's that generation that's going to live with all the outcomes of whatever we are doing today. So I would say those are my top three.
Thank you. And Barry, over to you.
Okay, and very briefly, Pete, because I think, Parul, they were a great three. And I suppose it's remembering that everything we're talking about, particularly, for business leaders, you do this well, your business benefits, society benefits, you grow bigger markets. This is all positive to do for business, for people who go, how much will this cost or whatever, which is often a challenge we get. But three things I would say is ask. So that point about data, how well do you listen to your stakeholders? How do you do stakeholder listening? But then you've got to listen. What are they telling you? Act on it. When you're acting on it, think about just transition. It's probably one of the biggest things we've got to address. Parul, you said quite a lot on that, so I won't cover that again, but I think we've got to do that. And then the third is be ready for the show me, because I think how you're going to be held to account, and all of us held to account, that's going to step change. And again, that is, to my mind, not a risk. It's a massive opportunity for every business to embrace.
And well, look, brilliant to talk to you, listen to your insights. I think I just add, just as a human, right? I think that the urgency required as well. We've got to take this seriously. We've got to take action, and we're going to do it quickly for all sorts of reasons. Thank you so much both for your time this morning. Absolutely fascinating. And anyone watching, I know Parul and Barry will be more than happy to have conversations if there's anything that sparked your interest today. So that's it for today's LinkedIn Live. The next one will be towards the end of June, where actually it's really exciting. We will be releasing this year's Hopes and Survey findings. This year, we've surveyed nearly 60,000 workers across over 52 countries around the world to work out what's on their mind, what's making them tick, what's important to them. We know from the comments from last year's one, it's something that people sort of really look forward to reading. There are some really interesting finds. We're just cranking through the data now. So we will be doing a LinkedIn Live on that towards the end of June. We're just working out the date at the moment. If there's any other subjects you want us to cover, please feel free to drop me a message on LinkedIn. Absolutely happy to do anything that's of interest to the community. But meanwhile, thanks ever so much for your time today. We really appreciate you joining and taking part in the conversation. I wish you a very happy rest of your day. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.